Welcome to day 3 of 30 Takes in 30 Days, an NBA preview series going in ascending order of every team's likelihood to make an NBA championship. In the last 2 days, this series has been Eastern Conference dominated, but call the Pet Shop Boys because it's time to go west and talk about the Portland Trailblazers, because somebody has to be the worst team in the West. Now, there are teams in the East that are probably going to be worse than the Blazers, but they don't play in the same division as the Nuggets, Timberwolves, and Thunder, the three teams who were all within one game of each other in the last week of the season last year, and none of them got worse. Last season, in a 21-61 season, the Blazers went 8-44 against Western Conference teams. Hey, that's 13-17 against the East. And there's just no chance that number against the West is getting any better. Teams are going to come into Motor Center smelling blood in the water and ready to give Donovan Clingan an answer for when he goes on Paul George's podcast. I actually like Donovan. I think he's going to be fine and his defense will translate. Plus, he only looks slow because he's white. There's enough talent on this Blazers team that if they were in the East, they'd probably be competing for 10th. But as a team in the West, they just give me the De Niro face. And after all, this series is organised by the likelihood of winning a championship, and if Portland so much as made a play-in game in the West, I'd fly myself over there and offer my services to General Manager Joe Cronin as his personal punching bag. There's talent on this team for sure, but what they have just isn't enough and won't be for a while, so it's time to make some key decisions about which players they're bringing with them into their future. Because Portland have some guys capable of completely changing the title race who I'm sure they would be willing to part with for a first rounder or two. The trouble is, they're more or less the same team as last year and they had no trouble losing games then. But in the battle to poop for Coop, Brooklyn and Detroit are already 14 games down in the standings and we're not even at tip-off. Plus, I have restless NBA fan syndrome, call it Bill Simmons-niosis, and I can't stand seeing a team tread water doing nothing year on year. For the last few years, even during Dame's last 2 with the franchise, Portland have attempted to develop their young talent while keeping their veteran talent on board. Last season, they tried to develop Scoot Henderson while holding on to DeAndre Ayton, Anthony Simons, and Jeremy Grant, and came last in the West. 2 seasons prior, which were the last 2 years of Dame, they finished 13th in the West while trying to develop Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons in pairings with a whole bunch of second-best guys. CJ's last year, some Josh Hart years, Norm Powell, Robert Covington, Matisse Thybulle.
Carmelo Anthony used to be on this team.
And those are some really good role players that have all spent time in this not quite awful but not very good era in Portland. They've been moving away from that model. Their average age is less than 25 for the second year in a row. Jeremy Grant is the only guy above 30. They're the second youngest team above the Thunder, but they have to know that they're at the other end of the timeline than OKC. So it's time to get even younger by cashing in all that talent they've been accumulating in a year when, depending on your optimism, there's anywhere between 4 and 7 contenders. Sell high and bottom out. Why hold on to 4 guys who can be anywhere from the 4th to 8th best guy on a playoff team when you can turn that into a first rounder in another year when their own first round pick is being held hostage by the Bulls, potentially until 2028. This is a weird one. If the pick lands anywhere in the lottery, it's Portland's. If it lands between 15 and 13, it's Chicago's, and that repeats all the way until 2028 when it will convey automatically and the Larry Nance Jr. trade is complete. And if you're trying to remember a trade between the Bulls and Blazers, that was the deal that sent Larry Markkinen to Cleveland, Derrick Jones Jr. to the Bulls, and Larry Nance Jr. to the Blazers. And that combination of players and teams might as well have been broadcast in black and white. But the pick remains. So, with a first-round pick in limbo, why would you want both Anthony Simons and Scoot Henderson? One can shoot and the other can't. Get rid of the one who can, and who they have to pay $300 million for in his next contract in 2 years' time. Trade him now while he's still being judged on what he could be instead of what he is. He's got 2 years, $50 million left. That's nothing. Robert Williams just played a month straight of basketball and held his opponent to an effective field goal percentage of 9. How about a first and a second in Derek Lively? You're telling me you can't convince Calvin Booth that Jeremy Grant is the Bruce Bowen replacement that they never found? What, Calvin doesn't want to pay a worse Aaron Gordon $30 million this season? Good argument, Calvin. The Pacers can't be convinced into Thybulle. Is there any chance you can spin DeAndre Ayton averaging 23 and 12 in the last 2 months of the season into deceiving some team into believing that he's something other than a cat with no ticker who's afraid of contact? Get on the phone, Joe. Wheel and deal. Make some calls. No, you're just going to trade a bunch of second rounders for Denny Abdia? All right. At the end of the day, they lost a bunch of games last year with basically the same roster. Teams are far more protective of their first round picks than ever before, and maybe just giving the entire team over to a bunch of guys who can't legally drink is a bad idea. Maybe I got too caught up in the bit. If I had charge of a team for even 25 minutes, I'd have 1, given jobs to all the boys, and 2, traded the entire roster for my guys. Actually, one of the first guys I'd trade for is on the Blazers, Toumani Camara, who was good for 11 points and 7 rebounds a game last season, together with bone-crunching defense by the brute from Brussels. I was really high on Scoot last year, and that didn't go well for me. He was definitely the Krillin to Wemby's Goku and Brandon Miller's Piccolo. I'm not worried, but an athletic finisher shooting 50% at the rim in their rookie season isn't great. Rose-tinted glasses, he shot 40% from deep in 7 games in April on 42 attempts a month after shooting 28% on 171 attempts in March. That might also be bad. I said before, DeAndre Ayton's a cat, we all know that. Shaedon Sharpe continues to improve, he can jump out of the gym, his three-point shot is improving, he's never really played a full season of basketball, even organized basketball, he's still catching up from college, but I like him a lot, I like to watch him play, I like to see him continue to improve, and I do look forward to watching him this season. Duop Reath, I should mention, just as a super versatile pick and pop big who Brian Goorjian couldn't use properly, but Chauncey Billups can. And that probably raises the question. Is Chauncey Billups a good coach? I genuinely thought he got fired. JB Bickerstaff coached a team to 48 wins, 51 the year before, and still got fired, so how does Chauncey have a job? Now, obviously Chauncey's a basketball genius, he was a coveted member of the Clippers staff as an assistant, his ability to explain the game when he was a commentator is some of the best I've ever heard, and while I think that Portland has no reason to win games, there's also nothing to be gained from losing games by 60 like they did last year, but there's no great development coaches out there, so what, who are you going to hire? Brett Brown? Again, Portland are a basketball team that just make me feel, it's going to be the worst in the West. They're going to play Denver, OKC, and Minnesota 12 times. Do they win one of those games? I don't think so. Come back tomorrow where we're going east again and talking about a guy who is the Ethan Hawke in my Before Sunrise. Bye.